is generally alchemy was understood as a thing of phases. And phases were usually described with colors or states, you know, states of transformation. So you have negredo, the black, albedo, the white, rubedo, the red, and citrinitas, which is yellow or gold. So if you look across many different texts, these phases kind of always reappear, but in different orders and in different setups, let's say. Okay, I'm just gonna highlight this as red because we don't have the alchemical colors. Okay, so black, white, red, and then yellow or gold. Depending on who interprets or studies alchemy, they come up with a different phase, a different kind of what do you say? Kind of a different arrangement of these four colors. Okay, depending on the person who's studying or writing a text about alchemy. So Jung, for example, has placed the yellow here because he has seen that the main goal of alchemy is the transformation, which is the rubedo. So each phase basically describes a phase of the treatment of a metal in order to reach the final product. For me, the final product should be gold. So I see these as like naturally aligned like this to kind of create the final product. So it's kind of an interplay between 3 plus 4. Okay, just take my words now with a grain of salt. We'll understand them as we move on. But these have been generally, like you look at other texts, there are many other texts that include a fifth phase and sometimes a sixth phase. Sometimes they include different colors like green, like blue. Generally, these colors are understood to represent the different four elements. So you can always, like, for example, black is earth, white is air, red is fire, and yellow is water. Doesn't make sense. Would be easy to remove the blue and put the remove the yellow and put the blue. For example, you know, gold could be understood as air, and white could be understood as water. So they switch. So there's nothing completely firm, is what I'm trying to say. But for what we're talking about today, I want us to remember the four phases, these four colors specifically, because we'll be working with them to understand something about story structure in new media. Okay? Which brings me to the second part. Which is story structure. One last note about alchemy to transition here is alchemy dealt a lot with symbols, both seen and unseen symbols. So generally, alchemy has had the main principle of solvet e coagula, which means kind of like dissolve and then put together. So it has been seen as the study of union of opposites generally, or union of two complementary things. And that's why the general symbol for alchemy has been the union of the downward triangle, which symbolizes the material, and the upward triangle, which symbolizes the heavenly. And then you get the creed as above, so below. So there's something that I didn't mention before jumping to this, sorry, is that alchemy, this has been one of the founding principles that many alchemists have begun from or initiated from in order to understand how we got here, okay? And these type of sciences have many different names, okay? So now we're saying alchemy as a broad umbrella term, but you can also call this esotericism, occult sciences, hermeticism or hermetic philosophy, Kabbalah could be understood as a way of working with these things. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Kabbalah, but it's like a Jewish form of mysticism. But the goal of all of this is to make us understand the elements and their transformations, okay? So this brings us to story structure, because I think to understand the nature of things, we have to understand how things move. Because essentially transformation is change. The main starting point of any story is change. In script writing, we call this a beat. A beat is every time something changes the status quo. So let's see where I'm teaching here. This is the status quo. You're listening stuff. Someone comes in, interrupts the lesson. That's a beat. That's a unit of change. So it's a small unit of change, creating many different changes all around it, let's say, encapsulated by a certain frame, mold, or structure. And generally, a circle is a very interesting way of understanding stories, because there's something about stories that is cyclical, that keeps repeating, okay? So we're gonna take this as the starting point and divide this circle into 4 first, okay? And then into 8. And here we have created something called the story circle. A story structure that has been simplified and devised by Dan Harmon, who's one of the writers of Rick and Morty, this very famous animation show. So Dan Harmon takes the very classic structure of the hero's journey. I'm sure you've all heard about it, hero's journey, which in a sense is the story of someone who is called to an adventure. So someone is in normal position, let's say it's you. You're called to an adventure, or you lack something, or you want something, or need, okay? Want or need. So you decide to cross the threshold from the known to the unknown, okay, in pursuit of what you want. So you go, you cross the threshold into the unfamiliar place. You find what you're looking for, the lack here. You take it, but you lose something in return, because for every gain there is a loss somehow. It's like a law of life. This is Dan Harmon, it's not my stuff. And then you come back, you cross back from the threshold, return, until you finally go back to the same status quo but changed, okay? So this is the most classical form of story, narrative story structure that is ever taught. But it's something that, as someone who has been working more than 15 years in the media sector as a fiction scriptwriter specifically, there's a lot of emphasis on how this is a monomyth. This term was coined by Joseph Campbell, comparative mythologist. So he saw this as a monomyth, meaning it's one structure that can unify all different myths and story structures and fables from all around the world, unified in one story that more or less, he said it's the hero's journey. This is Dan Harmon adapting it to the story circle. But Dan Harmon's adaptation makes this hero's journey, which was usually seen as an external quest. Think Lord of the Rings. Frodo has to throw the ring in the fire. He comes from a place where it's very chill and he doesn't want to leave, so he is called to the adventure. It's not a want or a need here. What he wants and needs is to stay in his country chilling, but he can't do that because death is coming to him, so he has to go. He should go. He's called to an adventure, and all of this is the Lord of the Rings, basically. Frodo out of his home, trying to find his way to be able to do the task that he needs to do, okay? And this, the take, is basically seen as the climax of the film, and the lose is Frodo lost a lot throughout the whole way. So you understand. So this story has kind of been told over and over. It's very familiar. It's John York in Into the Woods, a very interesting book where he talks about the structure using many examples, like intuitive examples from stuff that everyone knows. He's like, you give a 5-year-old kid a pen and the paper and tell them to write you a story, they will follow the structure somehow, okay? It's also known as the 3-act structure. a structure basically with beginning, middle, and end. Okay. Three-act structure or five-act structure, which was very Shakespearean. Shakespeare used to write in 5 acts. But basically, we can look at it like this. So we have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Okay. And what happens, the change, the series of changes are usually denoted in a line that goes up with tension until the highest point of tension in your story and then goes back. And there, in this, thus you have the beginning, middle, end, or exposition, body, and then denouement, introduction, body, conclusion. It's kind of all the same thing, okay? But here is where it comes interesting. So, a year ago, I was preparing for a course on world building, which is basically how to build a world, a fictional world, and what a world is. So it was a course that was kind of aimed at understanding a concept called story world or fictional world, and how this can be like something like Lord of the Rings, but it can also be something that exists in our real life today. So while searching, I came upon this ancient structure that comes from the East, an East Asian story structure called Ki Sho Ten Ketsu. Okay, which is basically a 4-act structure that does not, as it was presented to me, as I found it, it was a structure that is said to be not driven by conflict. I was very curious about what that meant, because in everything I studied anywhere, it was always like, without conflict, you don't have story. So what is Kisho Tenketsu? Very simple, the most intuitive thing I've seen in my life. Ki is the introduction, okay? The beginning, the exposition of your story. In direct Japanese, I think translation, it means rise, which I really like. It's like the it's starting, something is beginning, something is unraveling, okay? Sho, which is kind of the biggest part, it's maybe ×2 of the first part or ×3, is the development. It is where most of your story is happening, is where you meet the characters, the relationship between characters, you understand a bit about the world you're living, the different places, the different rules, okay? And this is the part where the viewer is getting more and more immersed into the story without necessarily knowing what's unfolding exactly. And this is where the 10 comes, which is the twist or the turn. Something that dramatically shifts the course of events, breaks the status quo, okay? It doesn't come in the beginning of the story like with Lord of the Rings, okay, Sauron is back, Mordor, Frodo has to go. It comes towards the end where you usually feel the climax in the structure we were seeing before. Remember, it came up to until 3/4 of the story almost, and then it starts going down. It's the same here in a sense. But what the twist does is that it suddenly turns into somewhere else. Take it in the most basic idea, because I've looked at many different poems, texts, films, using Kisho Tenketsu. The twist doesn't always need to be like something happens here and now, like, for example, a bomb goes off. It could be that we shift the scene to somewhere completely different entirely. And because of this shift, we understand what happened before and understand eventually how this is going to be resolved. The resolution or the conclusion. Ketsu I've always gotten the term harmony here, because somehow, there's a certain logic to a structural logic to this, that when the contrast comes at the final quarter, the third or 3/4 of the story, it kind of makes you understand what happens before and after, okay? And we'll try to look at what that means together, but in a sense, it's the dramatic turn of event. It's the fold. I always imagine it like this. There's a straight path. You're going on this path, then suddenly something happens and you have to take a turn. And this becomes the fold. Okay, so 4 acts, 4 seasons. What else? 4 corners, right? 4 is the number of the material. So this, in a sense, as a structure, once I started using it, it's so much more intuitive than the 3 or 5 act structure, because these numbers are known to be in numerology numbers relating to power. And somehow all stories that have 3 or 5 acts, where generally all the stories we know, are built on conflict. The whole idea is that there are 2 opposing forces and one needs to win. Otherwise, the story doesn't end. Really, and even if the protagonist loses, the other side won. It's either or. Harry Potter, Voldemort says it, or Harry Potter says, I don't know, none can live while the other is alive. It's either me or them. So understand alone how this thought creates a lot of conflict in the world, because it sees things through the separation of opposites rather than the union of opposites. Which, in my opinion, a structure like Kisho Tenketsu kind of highlights by using this dramatic element. And this technique or dramatic technique is called the contrasting rhetoric. You create rhetoric, you create meaning through contrasting things. What does this remind us of? For me, it reminds me of dialectics. Dialectics, simply put, is that there's a thesis, something, an antithesis, it's other, and the union of both creates a synthesis. There has been a lot of historical critique on this idea, but honestly, this was devised maybe by the ancient Greeks. Until today, it's one of the most potent ways of understanding the world, through opposites, through oppositions. But somehow, the world we live in today kind of doesn't make you really understand the opposite. It makes you fear it and run away from it. I'm speculating, but think about it as we go along. So the twist, in a sense, for me, it denotes in Arabic, or in the Quran, this word exists a lot. It's called al-waqi'ah. It means the happening. The thing that comes without any pre-planning, the thing that suddenly shocks you into oblivion, the thing that you had not prepared for, catches you off guard. This is the twist. And the world somehow is made of this. It is never completely perfect, ever. There is always a twist. There is always something that was not pre-planned, okay? And this twist is what creates the dynamism of life. This is, for me, if you want to look at these as the 4 alchemical phases, the twist is definitely rubedo, the fire. I imagine it always as like when you cast a very hot fire on a metal, you change it. You change its color, you change its consistency. So the twist is this, like, the thing that drops suddenly and you don't know. Al-waqi'ah. This is how I see it. But I'm trying to show you that if we see it like this, it can kind of make sense of things. I am a firm believer that the stories we tell reflect the actions that we do and the actions that happen in life. And it's no coincidence that we live in a world with such blood, such destruction, because we tell stories that are driven by conflict. I'm going to demonstrate to you the main difference visually between the 2 stories. I try to see, if we said that the Dan Harmon worked with the story circle, I like to see Kisho Tenketsu as a spiral. So imagine it like this with me, okay? It's a spiral denoting that the world unfolds, okay? It rarely, it does go in loops, sure, but it also unfolds, okay? Somehow there's this very prominent theory in quantum science that history is not linear. It's actually, and it's not cyclical. It's actually like a spiral that keeps unfolding, which means like something like this, if you want to see it by the side, which kind of, this idea works with quantum theory because of this idea of entanglement, that you can be in this point in time and connect to this point in time in the future and also in the past. So it's a more, let's say, spiritual and like out of the macro way of looking at this, which is why I like to show Kisho Tenketsu as a spiral. But we'll do the same thing. We'll divide it as a pizza, like Dan Harmon did. just to be able to see how these two frameworks are not really in opposition. They actually work with each other. It's just a different way of looking. So you can see this, for example, as the key, the introduction. Okay? Usually this is the introduction. You haven't delved too deep into the world. The development here will become same thing. This is the known world, unknown world. Okay? Now look how this works perfectly. One piece of the pie stands out, and it is the 10, the twist. Okay? This is show. So the one thing, and in the Dan Harmon version, this was the part where you lose. Okay? This is the part where the hero finds what they came to find, but lose something in return. The karma of life somehow. Okay? Until the final chapter then becomes the Ketsu. You can put Dan Harmon's "you want, go, find, take, return, and change." Okay? So it works exactly in the same way, but this helps us visualize the story from a completely different angle or different framework. Okay? So again, the twist comes to make the whole story make sense. Okay?